21st Century Entrepreneurship with Martin Piskarik.
Why battery metals industry, Anthony?
Well, look, we're sitting here and, what is the one thing that every person to ever live has in common? They were born and they died on this earth. And, I think we are now at an awareness and at an inflection point where we realize we have to do something about pollution. We have to do something about climate change. And we have to do something about transitioning from coal and hydrocarbons to something which is greener. And, we've decided, at least for the time being, that electric vehicles and batteries are that transition, or they're the beginning of the transition. That's not the answer ultimately.
What is your strategy for growing your money while doing good?
Well, I have a couple strategies here. So the first one really centers around carbon credits. And it's kind of something that nobody knows anything about. Everyone sees that there's a European credit, and that's really the regulated market. There's one in California, Canada, all over the world, there are regulated markets. But, the voluntary market, I think, is much more interesting because there's a wide variety of projects. But in order to generate a carbon credit, there are these removal projects. And that means you're taking carbon out of the air. And in particular, for me, I like the ones that are nature-based. So reforestation, preventing logging, bringing wildlife, biodiversity back into ecosystems. And so for me, on the one hand, I'll give you an example. I was raising some money about 6 or 8 months ago, and the investor asked me, Anthony, what is the worst thing that can happen here? And I thought about it, and I said, the worst thing that happens is we preserve hundreds of thousands of acres and you don't make any money. And that's really the first time I can say that, because I've been involved in all kinds of investments over the years where the worst thing that can happen is you go to zero or even owe money. But when you're involved in a nature-based solution carbon credit, you can actually help save and preserve for generations to come these wide tracts of land. So that's one part of it. That's probably the more exciting part of it. I think the other part of it is, we're involved in the nickel business. We're the largest producer of MHP in the world, mixed hydroxide product. And, nickel is a really critical component of batteries that are rechargeable. So not just electric vehicles, but all sorts of batteries. And, one of the big problems that we face globally is pollution. So we talk about climate change, but pollution and a consumer-driven economy where people just throw stuff away. And, rechargeable batteries are great because they get more than one use. And they also, by the way, help power electric vehicles like Tesla and all the other ones that we see out there, Rivian and so on.
What do you consider to be some of your most important aspects of your work?
Yeah, I think, there's a bunch to unpack there. But, for me, I view myself as a naturalist and someone who really has come from a place in the commodities business of wanting to, really help the environment, to really help the earth. We're all, we just have this short window of life where we're on this planet. And, you spend so much focus on the day to day. And I think I've kind of reached this point now where the most critical aspect of it is making money for shareholders. Because if you're not creating a return, you're not going to have the money and the ability to do anything. And then making sure those funds are directed towards projects that, ultimately can benefit the earth. And that's pretty unique. I'm not aware of too many people doing that. I think you've seen historically is commodities business is ripping commodities out of the ground and moving on. And now I think there's a growing awareness of, the need to be a little bit more thoughtful in relations with local communities to make sure that they're benefiting from the extraction of metals and materials from the ground. I think that there's an awareness now of the need to do this in a way that is, as environmentally friendly as it can be. Ultimately, you're always going to be digging a hole in the ground. And, I think we're at the brink now of pretty dramatic changes in the industries because there's a realization that if we don't change, there'll be real problems. And, What I would challenge a listener or a viewer to do is look around the room that they're in right now. And literally as I look around, every single thing that I see is either mined or grown. This is the most fundamental and basic component of everything that we do. You cannot have a modern life without mining. It doesn't exist, right? You drove to your work in a car powered by gasoline or electric vehicle. That car has copper, aluminum. It has your phone that you might be talking on as soon as we hang up has tin and tantalum. So all these things are mined or grown, and I think the conversation is now changing, and we're getting to a point where we acknowledge that this has to happen, but how can we do it in a way that is more inclusive to stakeholders, a way that is potentially better in the long run for the environment, and so on.
What do you think is the key to success when it comes to investing in that specific area?
Well, I just tell you in general, my first rule is don't fight the tape. If you look around right now, you have these huge geopolitical shocks with Russia and China, Ukraine. And so, I think that there are times when you're best off doing nothing. Because, okay, we're always going to be able to read about the guy or girl that got in at the bottom and made, but that's not the average. That's not the average person. So I think first and foremost, I would say you don't have to do anything sometimes, which is important. And then I think next you need to determine your time horizon. If your time horizon is 6 weeks, that's one thing. If it's 10 years, that's another thing. And then I think you need to take an approach, a basket approach. So in the case of our sector, for instance, if you said, I believe in the electric vehicle revolution, if that's something that you believe in, I wouldn't go and buy a single stock. I would go and I would put together a basket of copper producers, nickel producers, maybe some lithium producers. So I'd have a basket of names. And then, something that I think a lot of people I talk to need to think more about is diversification across market cap. And, a lot of times people say, oh, look, I'm all in on this name. And I ask them about the name. I look it up and it has a $20 million market cap. And this is crazy. You should never, in my view, go all in unless it doesn't matter to your overall personal financial situation. That's something different. But if you're talking about your retirement, for instance, it's critical that you consider liquidity and the nature of the microcap stocks. So if you like nickel, for instance, or if you like copper, for instance, it would make sense to even own a basket of copper names that might include some earlier stage companies where you could have a 10 or 20 bagger, but it most certainly should also include some very large liquid names that you could buy and sell any day of the week. One of the things about these resource companies that people don't often think about is something in the financial world we call theta, which is time decay. So if an option, the theta is that over time it becomes worth less money. A 10-year option, hypothetically, is worth more than a 1-year option because you have 9 years, right? Well, in a lot of ways, these resource companies are like options, long-dated options with theta. And the reason I say that is because a lot of the microcap stocks have to continually raise money, diluting down the shareholders. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's part of the game. But if you are buying copper for the sake of copper, that theta over time is going to slowly deplete your investment in a microcap stock unless they hit. And so, my advice is really to consider buying baskets of stocks, portfolios of stocks. If you want the broader energy transition, you're going to include, the nickel, the cobalt, the copper, the lithium. Maybe even, by the way, you include some electric vehicle component makers, chip makers, right? Like you get the big full view. If you say specifically, I like nickel or I like copper, once again, same approach. Take a basket within the copper names and then buy a couple of the biggest, most liquid names. Don't go all in on the microcaps because I don't believe in that scenario you're actually getting the exposure you want. So it's all about managing risk. And I think, in this world, a lot of times people who are speaking to retail investors, they're really driving for the company that they're in charge of and are raising money for. And I think that's not a great service to the community. Instead, I think really as an investor, you should just think about what you're trying to achieve and diversify and construct portfolios to manage your risk. It's not about going all in, because that almost never works. It's about managing risk and making sure you identify what you want to achieve, the timeline, and how much pain you're willing to sit through, right? And which is another topic. We might all agree that copper is going to look great in 3 years. By the way, China has a big problem. It's going way lower first. Are you able to sit through those 3 years? If you're not, don't own any microcaps, man. Own the big caps that allow you to sell it on any given day, right? There's value in liquidity. And that's a really important concept that I think, just general retail investors miss that. I'll say it again. There's value in liquidity.
Because of the geopolitical situation, because of the whole mess that we have in the world, what is your specific perspective on risk given the current state of the stock market?
Yeah, I think the one risk that we're not actually giving enough weight to is really Vladimir Putin, shooting a small nuclear warhead in eastern Ukraine, or testing one. I think the day that happens, the market is gapping down universally. All risk assets risk off. And, even in the last few days, we've seen that, he is allegedly moving these submarines closer into the Crimea. We've also seen train movements. So I think that, in the West, and I don't know if we've shared this, I was a Fulbright scholar in Russia. I studied at Moscow State University. And, I think one of the problems that we have in the West is we have a hard time seeing the world from anyone else's point of view and perspective. And that's, of course, not to say that what Putin is doing is right, but I think it's hard for us to conceptualize that this individual might shoot a nuclear weapon. And he's coming from a place of feeling that one of the great tragedies of the century was the demise of the Soviet Union. He feels rightly or wrongly slighted by the West. He's been embarrassed by what has happened in Ukraine and Kiev, especially in the early days, and even in the last 2 weeks in the East. It would seem that the West is probably has agents there and is heavily guiding these advanced weapons. So that's all to say that I think that the whole pressure is building, and also let's not let the U.S. off the hook. So what is happening here is the West and the U.S. have dumped huge amount of weapon systems in. This is big business. Raytheon. These guys make fortunes on this. And, now you probably have the U.S. Arms sale apparatus calling India and Russia's, consumers and saying, hey, guys, do you really want Russian weapons? It seems like they don't work. So this is also big business. And I'm not suggesting that that's why the war is being fought, but I would be remiss to not kind of comment on the fact that these weapons are on display, and the U.S. sells a lot of weapons globally. And so, once again, it's a very complex thing, and we've embarrassed him, and that could happen. And if it does happen, I don't think the market has priced in that what will happen if he even tests a nuclear weapon. I think that's going to make the markets really scared.
And what's next? What's the next step?
If it happens, I would think that you would then see pressure from China and India, on Russia. I think that's the line. That's kind of a line where, I don't think China wants that. I don't think India wants that. So I think that becomes a line for him. And I think you would just see tremendous sanctions. But it's not without cost. Russia is a massive hydrocarbon supplier, a massive nickel supplier, palladium. A lot of basic materials come out of there. And so, his bet is that the pain, which is going to be inflicted globally, and in particular on Europe with gas, that pain will outweigh people caring about Ukraine. And that's his bet. And so, in a way, he's going to be really backed in a corner before he shoots that nuke, because whilst I do think that the global community will come together, once again, the pain that will cause globally if the Russian crude supply came off the market, it's going to China now at a discount. If all of that came off the market, it's kind of hard to not see a pretty significant global recession. U.S. shale can't ramp up fast enough to plug a Russian crude full export ban.
Absolutely, I understand that. By the way, do your industry has any connections with military as well?
I would say that cobalt in particular is used in missile systems and advanced, kind of aerospace industry applications. So that's universally true. It's interesting. Russia has plenty of cobalt for their own particular needs through Norilsk. America has no real cobalt. So that's kind of interesting about that. And in fact, a little known fact that until recently, the last few decades, America had strategic reserves and had huge stockpiles of cobalt just for situations, and other metals just for situations like this. I think other applications are really around chips and the basic materials that go into it. But there is a movement for electrification of heavy industrial vehicles, but I think that's still a ways off. As I said earlier, commodities is at the very base root of every part of our modern life. And you can't know it all, but I actually find Twitter, interestingly, a really great source of information, because you pick who you follow. So there's a selection bias there, but I think it's a really fantastic way actually to curate kind of a following. And then, the big banking houses, they all produce research, Goldman and Morgan Stanley. And actually the Canadian banks, because mining is such a critical part of their economy, have fantastic research. And then, it's important to attend conferences and keep in touch with traders who are actually physically day-to-day trading, people who are developing mines, and it requires a lot of travel. I don't think there's one way to do it, but it certainly requires you to constantly be thinking about things, meeting people, reading. And, I think it's important that you're trying to kind of push your bias aside and think about, why this person, why what they're saying, which is in contradiction to what you think might be right. Why are they right and you wrong? And so I think it's important to really try to have an open mind about ideas. And then it comes back to like being a thematic investor in terms of like picking commodities. I really like thinking about some structural change in an industry like electric vehicles. And then, because mostly the world's going to be the same, but if you have a structural change with a new demand coming in, then you can start to change your supply and demand models. And then you can look to the future and say, wow, we have a big hole in copper supply in 5 years. And, so I think that's interesting. So that's how I look at the world.
How do you keep up with the rhythm? Do you have any specific personality traits that you think are important for keeping up with the rhythm? And what's your daily routine? Do you have any specific daily routine? Do you practice any specific sport, meditation, anything like that?
Yeah, so I try to run in the morning, get up, run in the morning, and then I go on Bloomberg, look at the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, look at some papers in Africa, Canada. I look at Twitter to see, so I kind of look at the news flow, see what emails have come in overnight, and really kind of get up to speed before I have morning calls and start the day. And then, in the evening, I try to cycle a bit. But I would say, my true passion is the outdoors. So I love rafting and fly fishing. And you can't do that every day, but, I really enjoy that. And I also enjoy skiing.
What are some of the challenges you have faced in your life and in your career?
Personal life, I mean, just when you travel that much, it's really challenging on personal relationships. I mean, it's if you're gone 50% of the time, that's hard. And by the way, you're not just gone, you're in the air, or you're in the air when everyone's awake, and then when you get there, everyone's asleep, and then you're jet lagged, and then when you come back, you're jet lagged. So I think that travel is a heavy burden over time, or even physically just staying in shape. It's very, my weight over the years has been up and down based on my travel schedule. So I think that's one, and then I think, when I look at some of the most exciting and also some of the most kind of the biggest train wrecks that I've been involved in over the years, it comes down to investing in all these different places that have different rules. And those rules might be written or unwritten. They might be cultural. They might be legal. But when you invest across large numbers of different countries, a lot of stuff can go wrong. And I think that managing that over the years has been the source of some of the big wins and probably some of the pileups.
What advice would you give to someone considering a career in mining? Is it possible to go into that kind of a career as an entrepreneur, or you need to focus to C-level to be part of a corporation?
There's always opportunity to be an entrepreneur. I will say one of the big mistakes is like, you're working at your job, working 9 to 5. Well, when you become an entrepreneur, you're working, 365 days a year, 20 hours a day. So I think for some reason, there's this idea amongst some kids that I've mentored that somehow an entrepreneur is working less, and that's just not true. So I think the first thing you got to say is that if you're committed, that no one's going to care like you care for the businesses. The second one is, you're taking on risk, and there's huge rewards associated with that. But I can tell you, I've invested in lots of things over the years which have not worked. In terms of commodities, yeah, there's always opportunity for entrepreneurs. My experience with entrepreneurship is usually the most successful entrepreneurs have an idea around something they know. If you, I met this guy. I'll give you an example. So his dad owned a regional grocery store. There were 6 or 7 of them, and they were having problems with produce, like getting it in on the right time, and it was going old. And this guy who has gone on to create a multi-billion-dollar company, he was one of the first people to do injection molding pallets that had tracking devices in it. So think it leaves the warehouse, your carrots leave the way, So this individual had the insight around the problem, which was like groceries going bad and things getting lost. And he kind of saw that and came up with this idea, like, well, what if we had these pallets with the chip? This has been a long time ago, but what if we had these pallets with this chip in it and we rubberized them so we could reuse them and spray them? And that was that insight that he got from being there. And so, I also would say one thing about entrepreneurs who want to be entrepreneurs is do something and that could be a hobby. Maybe you love fishing. Maybe there's an angle with that, or maybe you love running, or, your dad is in construction or your mom is in the construction, because to just turn up to a totally new thing and think, oh, you're going to sort of change it all. I mean, yes, that's possible, but the most successful entrepreneurs I know, their ideas often come from an insight into something that they understand.
So Anthony in 5 years, Nickel in 28 in 5 years.
So in 5 years, I think, we intend to continue to be the largest producer of MHP in the world and supplying the electric vehicle revolution. On the other side, I founded something called the Oregon Group, as in the state Oregon. And, we write articles and produce commodities-centric information for retail investors. So you can check out theoregongroup.com as well, and we'll continue to do that and help to, inform investors about the changes going on in my industry. We are in a world rapidly transitioning to a greener future. And there are any number of ways to invest in that. Microchips, electric vehicle automakers, in my case, commodity companies. And what I would say to entrepreneurs is in whatever sphere you're in, think about how you might be able to participate in that, what ideas that you have that might actually be able to kind of connect in, because the amount of money raised is staggering. Probably trillions of dollars. To investors, I would say, you want to capture some of that and look at these companies and ideas and figure out what works for you and your situation and look at investing there.
21st Century Entrepreneurship with Martin Piskarik.